Gareth Haynes, music director at Daylesford Abbey. Thank you so much for joining us today on AbbeyCast. This is the first episode of our second season here, so we're grateful to have you. Thanks, Gareth.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You are a young man, and you've got a really exciting career ahead of you, so we want to catch you early on and find out a little bit about you, find a little bit about what brought you here to the Abbey, and really, you've just got so much talent that so many people love to comment on. I think to learn a little bit about you would be helpful, and giving people a more multidimensional scope of who you are beyond just this great performer and musician. So, Gareth, what led you to Daylesford Abbey?
Well, I've spent my life around churches. My dad is an Episcopal priest, so I grew up in church. I grew up with church music. I went to school at Temple University for music composition, and when I was there, I had a number of good music professors. One of them was Dr. Ted Latham, who was the music director here not so long ago. And the job opened up again in the fall of my senior year, and he recommended me. I was very fortunate, I'm very grateful to him that when he recommended me for the job, he recommended me very strongly, and then he helped me through the process. He helped me figure out how I would audition with the choir and even how I would interview with John. So that's kind of what got me here.
And I would imagine that a music interview is different from a standard job interview. Probably includes an element of performance, I would guess.
Yes. So the way that it worked here, I chatted with John Wisniewski on the phone a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came in for, normally during the choir season, the Abbey Choir rehearses on Thursday nights.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we haven't done that in a year. But,
sure.
So the Abbey Choir, I had to come in to an Abbey Choir rehearsal and introduce myself, and I had to spend some time rehearsing a piece that they were preparing for that Sunday. And then I got to bring in a piece of my own choice to teach them. And then I had to work on a hymn with them, I think. So I had to be ready to go into musical depth on a piece that was handed to me and on a piece of my own choice to show how comfortable I was doing both of those things. And then at the end of rehearsal, John... We had just finished working through the hymn, and John said, "Gareth, why don't you slide on the organ bench and play through an introduction? We'll play the hymn." And he said, "Actually, why don't you just play something improvisatory to get us into it?" So anyway, the rehearsal finished, and I remember walking back to John's office with him, and he just started telling me how things were going to go once I started, and he handed me a bunch of books, and I walked out, and I thought, well, geez, I guess I've got the job. And then there was another interview with the prior.
So the improvisational piece must have went well then.
I didn't think so. But anyway, yeah, so there's a performance element, and then I did have to do more of a job interview with the prior.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I think most of us have had the normal run-of-the-mill job interview of answering questions and maybe a brief sort of situational what would you do in this sort of thing, but to play and teach others is very interesting, especially for those not in the music world. And I've also had the pleasure of meeting Ted Latham, and he's really an incredible person as well, incredible musician. So to come that highly recommended is really something, and definitely some credit to you. So
it was an honor.
Yeah, that's great. And if I understand correctly, your first kind of little baptism by fire here was during Holy Week and Easter. Is that correct?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So that would have been the beginning of April, my senior year of college. So
okay.
I already had a lot going on.
Yeah.
When I was starting the job, Ted Latham told me that it was customary for the music director to move in, to live here for Holy Week.
Can I stop you and say that was one of the first things that was explained to me as the director of the Spirituality Center, is that the music director will be one of your first guests here during Holy Week. So
Right.
that's understood.
So it's customary for the music director to live here, and initially I thought that was hyperbole. I thought it was just, you're going to be living in your office. It'll be really busy. But no, you book a room Wednesday night and stay through Sunday morning, and it's just, get up, work, go to bed, get up, work, It was intense. It was an intense experience. I was fortunate that I had John next to me to guide me through everything. But gosh, the Holy Week liturgies are the sort of the centerpiece of spiritual life at the Abbey. Intensely structured liturgies and carefully scripted, and lots of music. And I had the Abbey Choir, I had the chamber choir, I had hired singers, I had hired brass players. I played clarinet, trombone, piano, organ, cantored the Passion Gospel. There were a lot of moving parts. And I remember getting through Sunday morning and then just, I was totally exhausted, mentally, physically, just drained.
Well, I know last year I was able to witness you cantoring the Passion Gospel, and of course didn't include all those instruments that you had just listed. So is that a comfortable thing for you to just step into or step behind an instrument and get your hands around it and start playing?
Well, my whole life I've been interested in playing as many instruments as I could get my hands on. It's just something I really enjoy.
That's a good start.
So, I have to practice the instrument enough that I know how to play it reasonably well.
Of course.
I try to push myself past my comfort zone, so I'm usually at the point where I'm a little nervous about what I'm doing. I like it best there, So, no, most of the time when I play or sing something at the Abbey, I'm a little bit terrified about it.
I agree with you. I think that's good to be a little bit nervous or scared about an undertaking that you're engaging in, because then I think that keeps you sharp and on your toes and you don't get lazy. And when you're performing in front of people and for liturgical purposes, I'd imagine that the stakes are a little bit higher, right?
Well, yeah, yes and no. The folks for liturgical performance, I suppose folks are less concerned about the notes. So if you miss a note somewhere, or if you crack, you're not going to get a bad review in the New York Times. But
good point.
I think what's most significant with liturgical performance is that you're aware that what you're doing is subservient to the liturgy. And so I'm really anxious when I intone a psalm, I'm really anxious that I not present myself as though I'm performing this piece of music. I want to present myself as intoning the text of the psalm, worshiping in song and helping other people to worship. So that's something I get nervous about. I'm always worried that people will perceive that I'm performing, and I would hate that.
Right. And I think that's what I meant by higher stakes, was that you are, in a way, kind of curating this internal experience that people are having while they're worshiping, right? It's a big part of it is the music and the way that engages. I know Father Andrew talks about this a lot, the different parts of our brain even. So for you as the musician, I would imagine that's, something that's coming from within, right? I know I've heard you do the Passion Gospel before, and it really blew me away, especially that was like my first opening months here and working at the Abbey, so it was nice to be a part of that. Can you comment on your personal faith life with whatever depth you wish to disclose, but how really that relates to you being a musician?
Well, that depends a little bit on how much you want to know. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, I guess I had the dubious luxury of being able to take a faith background for granted, because I was in church every week. I was there all the time. And I think as I started to get a little older, towards middle school, questions started to pop up, and I thought, I'll address those later. I can just take it for granted for now. And of course, I got to a certain point in my intellectual development when that just really wasn't satisfying me any longer. And I had a rough spot in college. I hit a point when I became pretty certain that I was an atheist, and I got pretty nihilistic for a while. And I started at the Abbey shortly after I kind of started to come back from that. And so having the opportunity to be surrounded with church and church music again definitely put me on the right track. And it's a continuing journey, you know.
Absolutely.
I'm certainly a Christian, and I'm certainly a liturgical Christian, but I'm still figuring out what that means.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out the nature of God to me, and we might touch on that a little bit later when you ask about the relationship between music and my spiritual life. Perhaps there's more I can say in that vein, but it's been certainly a continuing journey.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's, I think, a very good encapsulation of what probably a fair amount of us go through, at least if I can attest to it personally. In those pivotal years, high school into college, that sort of, coming into young adulthood, and for you to comment on the backdrop of the liturgy, in terms of kind of being surrounded by that, as someone who's also struggled at times in my faith life in terms of, what's my relationship with the church, with God, with all this stuff, to be surrounded by good liturgy, I think is very helpful, because it speaks to you and your brain in ways that you can't rationalize. And like you said, those questions that came up and said, I'll address them later, at least I know personally I've gotten some air quotes answers to maybe some of those questions just by being surrounded by good liturgy. So that's just my personal take on it, but I thought it was interesting you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested in hearing those at some point as well. I definitely find the liturgy to be the most moving element of being in a Christian community. And I think it's because more than catechesis, more than a homily, the liturgy, the ritual, we all have to lift our eyes upward when that happens. It's a ceremony that is, by its very definition, by its nature, directed upward.
Right. Very well put. Thank you. So speaking of liturgy, there you have kind of this, I think Father Andrew described it once as a cooperation or like a fusion of the arts, where you have a number of different mediums coming together. What is teamwork like as a musician, particularly with John Wisniewski, who plays the organ?
Well, so when you talk about a number of media coming together, are you asking what teamwork is like as a musician working with other people doing other stuff, or teamwork as a musician working with other musicians?
However you wish to answer the question as a musician. However you find it most appropriate.
Yeah, well, I asked that because you're putting that context on that question made me think about stuff that I hadn't thought about coming into the interview.
Okay.
So what we were saying before, or what I was saying before about the music being subservient to the liturgical experience, you have to be prepared as a musician, as the music director, to come in and submit yourself to whatever else is going on, and so if I'm working with Father Andrew on something, and I say, well, I think this piece of music would be appropriate here, and he says, no, then, all right, he probably knows better than I do, because he's a liturgist, but just being prepared to work with other people and hear what they have to say. Working with John is much the same way, because John has a depth of liturgical knowledge and scriptural knowledge, and a lot of perspective. And so I remember, I really hadn't done the music planning thing, or the liturgical music planning thing, until I started at the Abbey, so This was a development experience. And I remember fall of my first year, I was going through the Breaking Bread Missalette and reading the readings and planning the choral anthems a month or two ahead. And there was 1 week in ordinary time when I latched on to the only thing I could really find that for which I could find a piece of music was that the entrance antiphon touched on 2 lines of Psalm 130.
Okay.
And it wasn't even a particularly intense part of Psalm 130. It was just a passing reference. And the rest of the Sunday was actually pretty joyous. And I remember finding this very somber setting of Psalm 130. Out of the depths have I cried unto you, O Lord. And I very carefully recorded practice tracks for the choir of all 4 vocal parts, and then I played through the accompaniment on the piano, and I edited all of these things in Audacity, and I think you can see where I'm going with this. I put together all these practice tracks, and I scanned all the music, and I sent it all out to the choir. And John listened to it and immediately called me and said, Gareth, this is absolutely inappropriate. How about we do O Beauty Ever Ancient? And, well, actually, I think he texted me at first. And for about 10 minutes, I was livid. Yeah. I was beside myself. Yeah. I thought, how dare you? No, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Yeah. And then I after a couple of minutes, I thought, he's right. So, you have to be prepared to listen to what other people have to say and figure that you'll probably learn something.
Sure. And I think that we all get a little inside look of what that process as a music director looks like based on your description of that process alone. And that wasn't even, counting your engagement with the other people, really, the choir members and everyone else you work with. Well,
that was the other thing, was I had to then reach out to the choir and say, okay, I sent you all this stuff. I made a mistake. It was a poor choice. We're going to do this instead.
Right.
So I also had to tell 25 other people that, I was wrong.
Yeah. Well, I guess having a little bit of humility is a great tool for growth for sure. Especially when you're a young guy like yourself, right? And there's so much wisdom that you can just really accrue by being around people who have had these experiences and learn what works well in certain settings and what doesn't, right?
Yeah.
I know I've definitely made that mistake as a younger professional myself and going in real headstrong at times and be like, oh, this is the idea, right? And then you just have everyone going, oh, is it really? So, but they're all good learning experiences. Now, when Father Andrew Safferny found out that we were going to be doing this interview, he said, you have to ask Gareth, what is it like to put together such great music on a shoestring budget? So what's your secret?
Well, I appreciate the compliment for one. Thank you. I guess growing up, we had a fairly small congregation, a pretty small choir. All very dedicated people. But so I grew up in an environment where, number one, I enjoyed doing lots of different things, playing every instrument I could have the opportunity to play and so on. But also, my organist kind of threw me into those positions as a kid. So if he needed a timpanist for one piece, then all right, I'll do timpani. Or if he needed a clarinet here to play an oboe part on something, or what have you, or if he needed me to conduct the choir from the chancel. So I got used to wearing a lot of different hats. That's helpful. Being flexible. But also, there's a lot of good music in the public domain.
Okay.
A lot of good music. So, and the internet is a fabulous place. You can find high quality PDF versions of lots and lots and lots of great music for organ, piano, choir, instruments. And so I've always been inclined to try to save where I could while, producing a strong music program. I'm not very good at asking people for money. And I've learned a little bit about this from John, because he was a professional fundraiser for a long time, but I'm just not very good at doing it. And so I would rather figure out how to do it myself. Another thing is that I've always been interested in composition and arranging. So rather than buy somebody's setting of Psalm 23, say, I might be interested in writing my own.
Nice.
So I suppose that's another element. Sorry, this is a lot more
that's okay.
multifaceted than you might have meant. But another element is that I'm really concerned with, when I have the full Abbey Choir in front of me, I'm very sensitive to the culture of the Abbey Choir, of having a group of dedicated amateur singers who are together to lift their voices to the glory of God. And so I try not to hire singers very often. Now, for Christmas, Holy Week, I'll hire a couple of singers to bolster the sound.
Sure.
But in general, I really try to let the Abbey Choir stand on its own legs. You know, that's important to me.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's the long answer to a short question.
Sure, and as you're giving that answer, I'm even thinking back to what you had said before about not being a performance at Mass, right, during liturgy, and it being something that is on a much deeper level and higher level because we're looking upright. So yeah, to acknowledge the gifts within the community itself, and when appropriate, bring in some support for sure. As a musician, you talked a little bit about your spirituality before. Is that something that would you say is your spiritual life something that led you to music, or through your musical journey, you're finding that you have a proclivity for this, a talent for it, an interest, you continue to grow that? Is that what leads you to a deeper spiritual life, or would you say that it was something initially that led you to spiritually that led you to music?
I come from a musical family.
Okay.
So music was always... I can't remember a point in my life when I wasn't interested in music. My dad has said that my eldest sister, when she was a little kid, he would sing notes to her, sing parts of tunes, and from when she was a baby. And it took her a few years, but as she got a little older and her ear developed, she got to where she could sing those things back at pitch. And then my middle sister was somewhat the same way.
Okay.
Maybe she picked it up a little faster. But then what I have been told is that my dad could sing things to me, and almost immediately I could replicate directly.
Wow.
So it just, my entire life I've been interested in music. When I was a really little kid, people used to ask me what I wanted to do. I used to say I wanted to be a conductor. So music, I would say, came first as far as my awareness. And then as I got a little bit older, I got interested in liturgical music.
Okay.
I had some very moving experiences when I was in middle school, singing the Fore Requiem, things like that. And church was often where the exciting music was happening.
Okay.
Holy Week, lots of interesting music.
Yeah.
Got to play lots of instruments. It was a good time. As I've gotten older, I've tried to, particularly the last couple of years, as I've tried to figure out what the nature of God is to me, I have tried to relate my understanding of music to the nature of God. And this is a very nebulous thing, I guess perhaps by nature, but also because I haven't gotten very far with it. But the logic of music, particularly the music of someone like Bach, in a tradition where a musical idea is stated and then explored in various different voices and developed, the logic of that music is, I think, relatable to the divine logic of the universe, to Logos, and of course, through Logos to Christ, who is the personification of Logos according to John. So I really find on some fundamental level, a relationship between contrapuntal music and theology. And I've always felt that well-structured music has the quality of standing in a cathedral and viewing the architecture. When you can admire it, when you can admire a piece of music or a cathedral as more than the sum of its parts. You can see the elements that go into it and put it together, but then you can stand outside of it and recognize the whole as being a great and glorious thing.
Right.
again, I know that's somewhat rambling and nebulous, but that's kind of where I am with trying to relate God to my life as an artist.
I think that's not rambling, but a beautifully articulated response to how you connect those personally. That is a challenge, I think, to see the larger whole, right? Especially when we live in a world of bifurcation and choose a side and duality, right? And it's a great gift of the spiritual life, I think, no matter how you go about it, to have that toolkit or just that gift of being able to take a step back and look at the whole thing together, and how all of it, even the seemingly opposing dualistic forces, are in some way held within that one, right? So I think that you articulate that just wonderfully. And as a musician, I would imagine that there are lots of challenges, as you've kind of alluded to, and just what it takes to put together a liturgical event, or just for a Sunday Mass even. So what would you say are some of your typical challenges you find yourself hitting as a musician, along with what are some of the joys that come out of this for you?
Challenges. I don't know. There are, I guess there are times when you pick something that you think is going to go over really well and it doesn't, or you find yourself in the middle of something that's not going well and you have to see it through. You have no other choice. Those can be personally challenging because it's embarrassing. It's frustrating.
Sure.
But, I mean, for example, about a year after I started at the Abbey, I like to be very careful in picking responsorial psalm settings. I like to pick things that have an interesting refrain, not too difficult, but something that's, musically interesting and a nice tone for the verses. And I remember, again, about a year after I started at the Abbey, I picked a psalm setting that had... The refrain was the same 4 bars twice.
Okay.
It was, you'd sing the refrain and then you'd sing it again. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really, I hate to say it, but I didn't really look at it very closely before we got to it.
Sure.
And figure out that we could just cut 4 bars of it.
Uh-huh.
And so we got through it that Sunday morning, and it was long. It was so long. And, every time we got to the refrain, I thought, oh, boy, you have to do this twice.
It's an eternity.
Yep. And we got to the end of the Sunday Mass, and Father Andrew said, Gareth, the psalm was, I think he said the psalm was 6 minutes long.
Wow.
And I was like, I know. But there was nothing I could do about it. So that's, and then there are other times when you put something together and you think it's going to go over well, and for whatever reason people don't get into it. That can be frustrating. Sometimes your plans don't work out the way you have in mind. So John and I planned that, of course, back in ordinary time before Christmas, before Advent, we were using my Mass setting, the Daylesford Mass. And we got the congregation to where they were pretty comfortable with it. And the thought was, at the beginning of ordinary time, after Christmas, or after Baptism of the Lord, we would pull it out again and use it up through the 6th Sunday in ordinary time, so that the 6th Sunday in ordinary time be the last week that we would use it. Everybody's sung it over and over again, be big for the Archbishop. Well, of course, we've had week after week now where Mass has either been cancelled or rescheduled, or we've had different cantors in place, and the Mass ordinary has constantly been replaced.
Sure. And
so I'm sure it'll go okay on Sunday, but, I'm a little worried about it. That's really a very minor challenge, I suppose. It's just mildly
that's also
frustrating.
where you said you like to be, right? When you're up there in public, is you like to be on your toes a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I personally like to be on my toes. I don't like to be on my toes wondering if people are going to sing.
Right.
That's not where I like to be.
Right,
But, no, personally, I like to push myself. And I've gotten a lot out of... when I started at the Abbey, I finally had the impetus that I needed. I'm a somewhat lazy person by nature. I had the impetus that I needed to finally start working on my piano playing in earnest. And... So I've always tried to push myself at the keyboard as I've been at the Abbey, whether it's playing with someone else, whether it's accompanying the choir, whether it's playing a solo piece that is, I always try to pick something that I haven't played before or that's challenging to prepare. I'm always trying to push my comfort zone as a player. Yeah, I don't know. There have been challenges at the Abbey, but I couldn't pick out one that's really grinding.
Just the day-to-day.
It's been a good experience.
Yeah, it's a good challenge, right? It leaves you feeling good, kind of tired at the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when you're living here over the course of Holy Week.
Yes. At the end of my first Holy Week, I was exhausted, but it was a good exhausted.
Yeah, yeah. So what is your favorite instrument to play, or the instrument that you would prefer to be playing most of the time?
When I was... Well, through high school, I was a clarinet player.
Okay.
I was pretty serious about it. I played with the Philly Youth Orchestra, and I did some chamber music. And I was going to go to school for clarinet performance, and then at the last minute, I decided to go into composition, really at the last second. And I've also always really enjoyed composing. But now I think in the last few years I've shifted, so... I really enjoy playing the piano, and I really enjoy accompanying on the piano. I enjoy accompanying. These days, I've been working with a bunch of strings students, individual violin and viola students who are getting ready to record either for college applications or for competitions. And so I get to prepare these really solid piano accompaniments and sink my teeth into some real repertoire.
Nice.
And work with some good players. So I think if I had the choice all the time, I'd like to be accompanying.
Okay.
That's what I'm having the most fun with at the moment, and I'm seeing a lot of development in my keyboard playing. So.
Good. I would imagine that being a musician is, or so much of being a musician is having fun with it too.
You try.
Yeah.
Yeah. People like to say, if you love what you do, then you never work a day in your life. I don't think that's not remotely true, but... you can at least try to get a reward out of it as you're doing it.
Yeah, there are nuances to that maxim for sure, but I think it's important to have fun with your job. Yeah. So what is one rather obscure instrument that you play, like sitar or anything different like that?
Oh, obscure. All right. I play the church bells. Yeah, so...
Like the actual Abbey bells?
Well, no. Similar in that they are bells, but... no, so the church where I grew up...
Okay.
St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Burlington has a ring of 8 change-ringing bells. Change-ringing is an English tradition. A group of ringers stand in a circle, and each person is responsible for one bell.
Okay.
And you ring mathematical sequences... Now, the church isn't really all that well set up for change ringing, so that hasn't happened in a long time. But the bells, again, 8 bells, so diatonic scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And they're also rigged so that the bells can be stationary, and if you pull on a rope, the ropes are rigged up in a frame, you pull forward, the rope goes through a pulley system and engages a chiming hammer that strikes the side of the bell from the inside. And so I grew up playing 15 minutes before Sunday Mass. The chimer starts with a thing called the changes, which is sort of a tribute to change ringing. It's one person at a stationary rope frame, but you're playing mathematical sequences. And then you play some hymns. And so I grew up as one of the chimers. I'd start up on Sunday morning and maybe I'd improvise some harmony, or maybe I'd elaborate on a hymn tune a little bit. I tried to have fun. And so that was a big part of my musical development, actually. I was ringing these tower bells, 5 tons of bronze.
Yeah.
And when you're practicing, the whole neighborhood can hear you if you slip up, But so that now that I'm away from home, I really only get to play the bells once a year.
Okay.
Every year at New Year's Eve at midnight, I have a few of my friends up to the tower. We bring some champagne flutes and a bottle of champagne. We
Nice.
toast the new year, and then I ring the changes at midnight, and then we play some Christmas carols and have some fun.
Oh, how cool.
So that goes up. There's a video every year. The St. Mary's Facebook page posts that after New Year's, and it's amazing. It gets a lot of views. People share it around. Like, wow, I had no idea these bells were actually rung by a person. Or
Yeah.
it's so cool to see. So it's a lot of fun. I suppose that's probably the most obscure instrument that I play.
Okay. Okay. Now, how about some music that you're listening to right now that maybe people wouldn't expect you to be listening to?
Oh, I worry that the music that I'm listening to, everyone would entirely expect me to listen to. But
I'm just thinking because, we have Father John Zagarella, who just dropped some real shockers on us with Rock the Word. It's like, whoa, where did this come from? This is a real rocker,
Well, okay, I'll go through a few things. Some will
Okay.
be less shocking than others, I suppose. But I like a range of music. I really enjoy Bach on a spiritual level. But I also enjoy, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, the French composers, up through the Romantic era, Bruckner, Brahms. And then some of my favorite music comes from right around 1915, when tonality was kind of... The Romantic era had reached its ultimate excess. The orchestra that people were writing for was, 200 musicians strong, and the pieces were 2 hours long, and they took, the nature of the music was so dense that you had to take an hour to develop up to a real climax. And so composers around 1915, everybody kind of went in a different direction to try to figure out what was next.
Right.
And some of my favorite music, early music of Alban Berg, the music of the late piano sonatas of Alexander Scriabin. I spent about 9 months in college listening to nothing but the late Scriabin piano sonatas. More shocking, perhaps. When I was in high school, I went to Korea with a close friend for a few weeks. And so he got me into some K-pop.
Nice.
And back over the summer, or starting in March, when everything shut down, I had a lot more time on my hands. I started studying Korean pretty seriously for a while. And I got back into some of the K-pop.
Very cool.
And then lastly, in my mind, I've always been into jazz, particularly bebop. So like 1950s, 1960s. And I'm not sure if it's still the case, but for a few years, my absolute favorite pianist, if not my favorite musician, was Bill Evans. Probably the greatest jazz piano player who ever lived. I love everything of his that I've heard. Intensely personal and emotional approach to playing. So that's kind of my range at the moment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. There you go. A little bit of a taste of where Gareth is coming from musically, from the classical to the jazz and everything else in between, including the K-pop. So we've got a great talent here and even deeper and kinder person in Gareth Haynes. So we're really grateful to have him here at Daylesford Abbey, and grateful that he was willing to come on the podcast today and chat with us. If you're interested in finding more out about Gareth and his current project that he is involved in outside of the work that he does here at Daylesford Abbey, you can check out the Marian Anderson Historical Society. That's correct?
Yes. So that's just about the only public gig I'm doing at the moment.
Okay.
I've played some shows here and there lately, but things have been pretty reduced. But the Marian Anderson Society is going strong. They're doing live stream concerts. We have a program coming up on Saturday afternoon where a couple of people involved with the society will be doing a dramatic reading of the love letters between Marian Anderson and her husband, and sort of following
very cool.
their relationship through her life.
Okay.
And I'll play a few solo piano pieces interspersed, and there'll be one sort of art song as an interlude. So that'll be Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and you can find information on the stream for that, and you can find the season calendar for the organization at www.marianandersonhistoricalsociety.weebly.com. That's .weebly.com. .com. So Marian Anderson Historical Society.weebly.com.
And we'll include a link for that in the description of the video here for those that are watching or those that are listening through podcast, through Spotify or any of the other audio formats that our podcast is available on. Gareth, thanks so much for being with us today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And you can catch Gareth in any of his performances that have been recorded previously through the Abbey's Springhouse Media, which can be found at daylesford.org/springhouse-media, or you can find us on Facebook and YouTube, and all of those videos are on there with Gareth singing during Mass and Vespers, and we did the Late de Bundus around Christmas time, so there are a number of things that you can find Gareth performing at the Abbey there. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.